Did you ever have one of those bottom low moments where you just seriously questioned everything, right? And if you did, how did you pull yourself out of it?
Yeah. So I can explain. Yeah. So, I did have one of those, and I've had smaller ones, but there was one that was definitely even bigger. And I think that, because there's all the learning lessons that you have, but sometimes, and the opposite's also true. I've had periods of time where the wins just kept stacking, and then also times where the challenges kept stacking. And I remember at, one point we, so we had seen tremendous growth and tremendous success on that side, and we had geared up for even more growth. And then we had some challenges happen, in the sales kind of side of things, and a couple areas. And again, I always, take full responsibility for the overall company. And so there were just a couple of things that I could have done a little bit differently, and in the way that I led that team there, and then of course that trickled down right into that area. And so ultimately, we faced some challenges on that side, and we had a little bit of a fundamental model issue at that time, because we were doing a lot of one-off packages where we were selling individual packages. People would then pay in full that month. And so if you have if you're doing that, you grow your expenses, but you then have to sell all these packages to exceed those expenses and build your profit. Well, if you don't have a lot of recurring revenue, one thing that I learned, and this was probably one of the most expensive but also valuable learning lessons. So that's the thing. It's like what you said, right? It's like you learn from these mistakes and losses, and when it's a bigger loss, it's a bigger lesson, and it's a really valuable lesson. And so the thing that I learned there was, that type of model works as long as it keeps growing in terms of what your sales volume numbers are, or at least stays the same. But if you have a down month, let's say you have challenges on your sales team, which, by the way, self-perpetuate, because you start to have challenges there, then the sales team psychs themselves out, so they have more challenges. But even one lower month, right? What could happen is you could flip below where your expense line is, and then that runs into like more problems, because then you start losing money, even though you've built out all this infrastructure and you have all these clients. And because people are essentially prepaying for months and months and months, it just gets into this odd situation. And so this is something that, we encountered, obviously, a while ago now, but it was one of those things that it was like a wake up call, like, oh my goodness, there was something I didn't know. And I didn't know the value of, at that time, recurring revenue versus selling off individual kind of more consulting based packages. And you wouldn't think, and this is like a higher level lesson, you wouldn't think that collecting all the money up front is actually a problem, but it can be. Now, it doesn't have to be, but it can be, because if you're collecting all the money up front, but then you're raising your expenses that day, you still have to service all those people for those months going forward. And so you're not actually attributing that revenue the way it should be. It should actually be attributed on a basis for the time frame that you're working with that client. And so there were these different lessons that were involved there. But essentially, we were in that spot where we had some challenges on the sales team. We didn't really have as much recurring revenue, and we ran into issues. And I just remember being like, what is going on here? This is, and because the thing is, those kind of challenges can kind of compound, right? Especially if you have people on performance, you have people on this and that. And so essentially we had this small season where we faced some of those challenges there. And I think that was a time that really, made me kind of not question that I've always been steadfast in what I'm building and what I'm looking to do. But I really had to look and say, I think some things that I thought I knew, I didn't really know. And you need to have that humility to know that even if you really think you know something, like, okay, this is the model that works really well for us, and we've been consulted on and worked with other people, and works with a lot of our clients, like maybe there's a way to evolve a little bit to make it better. And I think that that's where really ran into some problems. But we had to have, had to let some people go on the sales side to fix some of those challenges and bring some new. And so it was definitely a low point. I remember, having to let go of a team member that had been there for a long time, and there was just some, animosity being built up around that. And at the time that there were a couple challenges. And so I think that, I know early on when we got on, you really want to dive in. Because I think that not a lot of people talk about those types of things, but these are the types of challenges that you face. But when you face these challenges, you will learn how to overcome them for the future, and you learn big lessons. And one of the big lessons I learned from this, there were some on the personnel side and sales leadership and that side, but the bigger lesson overall was the value of recurring revenue and also the way that you do accounting, even if you do book, kind of upfront revenue, making sure that you balance that out across the length of that contract.
It's interesting. You mentioned something really important. I think I want to just highlight it. So I have a software company. It's a SaaS business. So we operate on recurring revenue. Mm-hmm. When we first began, we were steadfast in looking for annual recurring revenue and a payment upfront for the year. And what we've learned, and now we're monthly recurring revenue with an annual contract. So monthly versus annual, one-time payment. The problem that I've seen is on an annual payment, you tend to not understand your churn because they pay one time, and then when they churn is when they don't renew at the end of the month, at the end of the year. If it's monthly, they're going to want to try to get out of the monthly recurring revenue. So if there's a churn problem, you'll know about it. But I think more importantly than that is entrepreneurs, especially young entrepreneurs. I always say an entrepreneur, a young first-time entrepreneur, very dangerous human being. The second most dangerous human being is a first-time entrepreneur with money. That's another dangerous instance. But imagine if you have cash at hand and you're not managing that cash effectively. You're right. As expenses grow, and they do as you continue to build up your client base, and if you spend the cash at the onset to grow your business unprofitably, which is how you grow quickly, there's going to come a time where you're not going to have enough cash to support that growth because you didn't plan for it, you didn't save for it. So that's one thing that I think folks should really think about when they get a bunch of cash up front. Make sure you understand where that every dollar is assigned to, because it's assigned somewhere. It should be assigned to some sort of expense or profit.